the entire timeline of Edward Richtofen, spanning both the Ether story and the current Dark Ether story. This video will examine all three iterations of him that we have seen thus far. The original Ultimis incarnation, the following Primis incarnation, and the current Eddie Richtofen incarnation, who went on to become the director of Requiem. Richtofen is one of two characters that have a through line to the Dark Ether storyline from the Ether storyline, including Samantha Maxis. I have already posted a video on the entire timeline of Samantha Maxis, which will be linked in this video's description if you would like to watch it after you are done with this one, since understanding both of their stories is very important for the future. And so are the most important characters, with of course Richtofen being a massive fan favourite. I'm sure that there's a bunch of people that have just jumped into Call of Duty Zombies in recent years, since it has grown a fandom in Cold War Zombies, and if you didn't play the old Ether story, you were missing out because those days were an absolute blast for Zombies fans. But you may be confused on the history of Richtofen, so this is what this video is aiming to do. Or maybe you are very familiar with Richtofen, but you just like a nice recap of his overall history to get you caught up for Black Ops 6 Zombies. In this video, I will be recapping all of the key events you need to know of his biography, and I want to give a huge thank you to the Call of Duty wiki, which I will have linked to down in this video's description if you would like to read it for yourself or alongside of this video, for providing a very nice summary of the events. Although particularly within the Eddie Richtofen chapter, I will be diving a lot more in depth than the wiki page, since of course that is a lot more pertinent to the current story that's about to unfold in Black Ops 6 Zombies, and unlike Ultimis and Primis Richtofen's, his story is still ongoing, whereas theirs has long since ended. Now, because we had both an Ultimis and Primis incarnation in the Ether story, I'm going to tell each of their stories individually, chronologically from each of their perspectives. Now, of course, their storylines intertwine at points, and because of this, you will hear the same events told in different orders from each of the perspectives of the characters. And I also think it's worth pointing out that because in the Etherverse there was a multiverse, there are many, practically infinite versions of Richtofen and the other characters too that we have never even seen before. And I wonder if Treyarch could ever go back to that old multiverse and tell some untold stories that we have never heard. With that being said, let's jump into the storyline of Ultimis Richtofen. Richtofen's bio in World at War stated, "Beware the dark." Dr. Richtofen, known affectionately as the Butcher to his victims as they scream in agony moments before he snuffs out their light, all through his career, Richtofen has been at the forefront of torture and information extraction research. Richtofen is an incurable sociopath and sees no moral distinction between natural death and murder. The victim is the victim, regardless of how their demise manifests itself. Dr. Richtofen has a collection of stuffed animals, most of them posed in positions of terror at the instant of their death. His story begins in the Call of Duty Zombies scene, when on May 10th, 1931, Dr. Ludwig Maxis formed Group 935, a research team dedicated to the study of Element 115. Edward Richtofen, at the time, had been a member of the Illuminati since August 30th, 1925. On August 11th, 1936, Maxis invited Richtofen to join Group 935 after the two Germans met, in which he agreed to join only because he was secretly acting on behalf of the Illuminati's interests. They would work together on many projects, with important ones being teleportation experiments with the matter transference prototype, which had marked success and resulted in the resurrection of a teleported corpse for the first time. Richtofen also carried out his own experiments in the field of teleportation, along with fellow Group 935 member Dr. Schuster. Though he was able to successfully teleport a walnut, Maxis declared it a waste of time. He revealed to Richtofen that Group 935 would soon be funded by Germany. Richtofen worried that this would lead to mass defections, so chose to continue working on his teleportation experiments with Dr. Schuster behind Maxis' back. After conducting more experiments, on January 4th, 1940, Richtofen eventually used himself as a test subject for teleportation, leading him to be teleported to a catacomb within the moon, where he came into contact with a mysterious pyramid device, unknown to him as the ether pyramid hidden by the apothegms. While inspecting the device, Richtofen was electrocuted and begins hearing the many voices of corruption, including that of the Shadow Man. They drove him mad. Richtofen apparently made a promise to the Shadow Man during this, and so likely both versions played a role in perpetuating the cycle, which similarly allowed both the Shadow Man and Monty to coexist in the universe in constant repetition, and allowed the Shadow Man to eventually make his way to Revelations over and over and over again. The device then teleported him to an exotic jungle where he spent 3 weeks learning of the Vril energy force and encountered the focusing stone for the first time. Richtofen was also worshipped by the natives, in which they built an altar in his name. Now corrupted by the dark ether, Richtofen was gradually being driven insane by an obsession to find Agatha. Afterwards, on January 23rd, 1940, he travelled back to the weapon factory Der Ries, Group 935's base at Breslau, Germany, where he started his plans to build a new base on the moon with Schuster and several other Group 935 scientists, all behind Dr. Maxis's back. Around this time, he also renounced his involvement with the Illuminati. When asked how he could abandon his obligations to the Order, he stated, "Teddy was a liar." Maxis carries on experimenting and documenting Element 115. On February 1st, 1942, with the moon base completed, now known as Griffin Station, Richtofen named Dr. Groff lead scientist and returned to the Earth to continue his charade with Maxis. Working alongside Schuster, Groff was left to discover how to power the MPD, which he did a couple months later when Schuster killed a rat near the device. Its death inexplicably began filling the tank, charging the device. They report their findings to Richtofen, who began sending soldiers and scientists to the moon to be sacrificed. Their souls used to charge the MPD. In a personal log, Maxis expressed concerns over Element 115's impact on Richtofen's behaviour. No longer trusting him, he wondered if it was a mistake to invite him to Group 935. Accompanied by Sophia, Maxis was transferred to the Kino de Totem facility to focus on creating Germany's undead army. His daughter, Samantha Maxis, was left in Richtofen's care. On May 15th, 1942, Group 935 operators travelled to Africa, where they uncovered numerous artifacts in what appeared to be an old American western town. They returned with the pieces of the destroyed Pack-a-Punch machine, which Richtofen gave to Dr. H. Porter. They also brought Richtofen schematics for the Agathan device, as well as one of the parts for this device, the Vril vessel. Knowing that the Agathan device can, essentially, grant the user any wish it desires, Richtofen plans to gather the Agathan device as a backup plan if his plan to reach Agatha fails. On July 15th, 1945, Richtofen travelled to the Siberian facility to do further research on live specimens. As her temporary guardian, he takes Samantha with him. Group 935 begins transferring 3 test subjects for experimentation that arrived on August 1st. A Soviet named Nikolai Belensky, a Mexican named Pablo Marinas, and a Japanese captain named Takeo Masaki, who were enemies captured by the Germans. However, on July 18th, a strange American man broke into the facility and was brought to Richtofen. The man was seeking the Seal of Duality, the Vril vessel. After he had explained himself, Richtofen offered the guards to take the sad, strange little man away and quote-unquote, find a hole. During an attempt to locate an appropriate stimuli that would trigger the brain's willingness to obey commands, Javier accidentally slipped and killed Pablo, removing his spleen. He also revealed he was performing experiments on Samantha. Richtofen reported another enemy has been captured and will be brought in to quote-unquote replace the Mexican. The subject is an American named Tank Dempsey, who was captured at the asylum facility after trying to rescue an American spy sent to investigate Group 935, aka Peter McCain. Richtofen documented the personality traits of his test subjects. He said Dempsey's intellect seems low, but his will is strong. Takeo is still staring at the floor, muttering what sounds like some kind of proverb over and over again. Nikolai has recently begun responding to stimuli, but only after injections of a new serum made primarily from vodka. Richtofen notes that their minds were almost entirely broken, with no memory remaining of who they once were. He also manages to create create another part of the Agathan device, the elemental shard, by binding his and the 3 test subjects' souls to a piece of element 115. However, before Richtofen could complete the Agathan device, Yina reported to Maxis that Richtofen had been suffering from 115-induced delusions and had been using 935 resources for personal projects. It was there that Yina revealed Maxis had ordered all development of the DD2 to be halted and that Maxis wished to speak to Richtofen at Der Riese. Richtofen correctly accused Yina of being a spy, attempting to sow discontent in 935's ranks. Maxis returned to Der Riese. He ordered Richtofen to do likewise so they may discuss Richtofen's loyalty to 935 and continue their work on the matter transference device. Richtofen returned to Der Riese with Dempsey, Nikolai, Takio, and Samantha. He places the test subjects, minus Samantha, into sleep, ready to be reawakened whenever. Using element 115, prior to his experiments with the test subjects, Richtofen was able to create a deadly weapon codenamed Wunderwaffe DG2. Maxis, though initially promised to mass produce the Wunderwaffe DG2, did not show any progress due to his obsession with creating resources for the war effort due to the funding received by Germany and his close relationship with his assistant Sophia. Infuriated, Richtofen reveled in his plot to destroy Maxis and Samantha, vowing that he would no longer continue to work on Maxis' undead army. Along with other Group 935 members such as Groff and Schuster, Richtofen came up with a plan called Operation Shield to dispose of Maxis and his daughter, as the MPD became fully powered. On October 13th, 1945, Maxis and Richtofen performed teleportation test trials on test subjects number 3, 4, and 5. All tests failed, including test 5, where Maxis uses Fluffy, Samantha's dog. As test 6 failed, Fluffy, now changed, is teleported back into the chamber. Samantha saw Fluffy and ran into the teleporter. Her father, Ludwig Maxis, chased after her. Richtofen sealed them both in the test chamber and teleported all 3 of them. Samantha was teleported to the moon while Groff and Schuster were working on the MPD. Running into the MPD, she was drawn inside of it, where she became corrupted by the dark ether. Maxis was teleported to the crazy place and developed the power to merge with electricity. Richtofen then shortly returned to the moon, where he quickly learns that Samantha was trapped in the MPD. He then ordered Groff to teleport Maxis there to coax her out of the device. In an effort to free Samantha, Maxis approached the MPD and persuaded her to come out. Once she did, Maxis gave her an instruction to, quote-unquote, kill them all. Maxis then killed himself and merged with the technology of Griffin Station, while Samantha unleashes the undead upon the base. Richtofen then returned to Der Riese and, after fighting through the undead horde, awakened Dempsey, Takio, and Nikolai. With no recollection of who they were or who Richtofen was, they agreed to help him. The four would become known as Ultimis, meaning the last. But Ultimis was the first ever versions of them we saw. On October 21st, 1945, Ultimis first travelled to the Rising Sun facility in Japan, a station ran by Group 935 and Division 9 to recover Richtofen's diary. Upon reading it, Richtofen began to form his plan to defeat Samantha. On October 28th, 1945, Ultimis then returned to Der Riese. With his diary, Richtofen planned to use the teleporter to return to the moon and confront Samantha. Unfortunately, the Wunderwaffe DG2 overloaded the teleporter and sends them through time, causing Richtofen to drop his diary. From Der Riese, Ultimis teleported through time and space and ended up at the Kino de Turin facility on October 28th, 1963, another station once ran by Group 935, which was located at an abandoned theatre. Unbeknownst to them, they began to receive help at this point from Dr. Monty, a keeper, the original keeper, who added changes in the background across time with such things as chalk drawings of weapons on the walls, helping Group 935 come up with the idea to make Perca-Colas, etc. Ultimus locates a lunar lander and flies to the Ascension facility in Soviet territory, which is where Richtofen finds out his diary is now located. Ultimis then located a lunar lander and flew to the Ascension facility at the Soviet Cosmodrome on November 6, 1963, and freed Anton Gersh, a scientist who worked for the Ascension group, from the Casimir mechanism, and Samantha corrupted Yuri Zavoysky, another scientist of the Ascension group, and obeyed a wish by tricking Gersh into activating the Gersh device. The rift created by it absorbed him and allowed Samantha to travel through. Yuri was also absorbed and was transported to the Pentagon. Richtofen recovered his diary and learned that they need the Vril device from the Siberian facility for his plan. Maintaining his ethereal form, Gersh sent them into a rift to their next destination before beginning his travels across space and time. The group then teleports to the Siberian facility on March 17, 2011, where George Romero is filming a zombie movie with 4 well-known actors. Samantha, in her pursuit of Ultimis, unleashes an undead outbreak. The celebrities find the group trapped in a small room. The film's stars fight the undead horde, ultimately recovering the Vril device for Richtofen. Ultimis then teleports to the exotic jungle where Richtofen once teleported to in one of his experiments, Shangri-La, in an effort to acquire the next artifacts Richtofen stated he required to defeat Samantha, the Focusing Stone. Ultimis soon arrived at Shangri-La on April 25th, 1956. Ultimis discovered explorers Brock and Gary, who are trying to find Agatha. During an eclipse, they are unwittingly trapped in a time loop. With the help of Brock and Gary, the group assists Richtofen in acquiring the Focusing Stone. Due to Dempsey overloading a teleporter at Shangri-La with the 3179 JGB-215, the crew accidentally traveled to the Pentagon on November 1963. After acquiring the Project Scadi prototype, they managed to travel to their originally intended destination. Having everything necessary to complete his plan, Richtofen teleported the group to Hangar 18 in Area 51 on October 13, 2025. Overrun by zombies, Ultimis quickly ran to the teleporter in the hangar, which teleported them to Griffin Station on the moon. Using the Vril device and the Focusing Stone, Richtofen had completed his grand scheme and swaps bodies with Samantha on the moon, giving him full control of the zombies and the ether. Then, Maxis contacted the remaining members of Ultimis through the station's electronics and asked for their help in defeating Richtofen. They agreed, though helping Maxis launch missiles at the Earth, leaving it fractured and broken. They severed Richtofen's connection with the ether, but he maintained control over the zombies. Over the course of the next 10 years, Richtofen and Maxis all attempted to use their power to communicate with the remaining residents of the Earth to get them to power up polarization devices. Richtofen's plan was to mend the rift in space-time and acquire full control of the ether, while Maxis' plan was to open Agatha and reunite himself with Samantha, even though it would result in the destruction of the Earth. Richtofen, however, could only communicate with those who have eaten zombie flesh, leaving him with the only choice being a cannibalistic survival group called the Flesh, by speaking to them as a voice within their heads. The conflict between Maxis' followers and the Flesh would go on until Richtofen finds an individual named Samuel J. Stullinger, who is a former Flesh member who survived a major battle between the Flesh and Maxis' followers. Stullinger then bumped into Russman, who had stolen a bus from an abandoned Broken Arrow facility. About a week later, they ran into Martin Johnson and Abigail Misty Brearton at a diner near the Hanford site facility on October 21st, 2035. Maxis asked them to complete the polarization device in his favor. Stullinger, having consumed zombie meat, is contacted by Richtofen, who orders Stullinger to construct the device for him instead. The crew, now known as Victis, meaning survivors, constructed the device for Maxis. Still hoping to regain control, Richtofen teleports Victis to Province 22 on October 22nd, 2035, where he demands that Stullinger activate the second polarization device. Once again, the crew sides with Maxis. The voices cease for some some time, leaving Victis to wander the Earth. Victis then arrived at an old western town on December 31st, 2035, now located beneath a mining facility in Angola. The voices of Maxis and Richtofen return. There are two possible events that we know of that played out on Buried, because of course we had a multiverse, but we know that by the time that the broken cycle swings around in Black Ops 4, what event is actually canon. I'm going to read the non-canon version first, but I want to reiterate, because we are in a multiverse, this still did happen, so technically speaking we can't say one is non-canon and one is canon. It's just that there was a perpetuating cycle. Events happened over and over and over again and in many different ways, all leading to the same outcome until that broken cycle. So in many versions the non-canon ending happened, which would just reset the cycle. Nevertheless, this is what happens. If the player decides to follow Richtofen inside of all three Easter eggs, the rift will be mended, eternally damning the soul of Samantha Maxis, and the link with the ether and the earth will be reinforced. This allows Edward to gain full control of all energies and become omnipotent, granting his soul the ability to leave the ether and enter the body of Stullinger, whom he uses as his physical host. Meanwhile, Maxis ceases his existence inside the Griffin Station computer systems. The canon ending is, if the player decides to follow Maxis' side of all three Easter eggs, a gateway to the ether will open, allowing him to escape his digital form and assume power over the ether's energy and use it to open the gateway to Agatha and destroy the earth in the process. Meanwhile, Richtofen's soul is transported into a zombie with blue eyes and doomed to forever walk the earth as one of the undead. They activate the final polarization device in Maxis' favor. Now corrupted by the Dark Ether, he reveals his true intentions to Victis and punishes Richtofen by trapping his soul in a zombie. With Richtofen defeated, Maxis then uses his power to plug Samantha's soul from Richtofen's body on the moon, and places her in Agatha alongside him. Realizing that her father has been corrupted, Samantha reaches out to an alternative timeline version of him residing in Dimension 63. In the Call of Duty Zombies comics, it is revealed that undead Richtofen ended up being transported through the Dimension 63 timeline, thanks to his Primis version of himself. He soon finds out about the fate of the Earth, and in efforts works with the Primis version of himself to fix the fractures in the universe with the help of the Victis crew. Sometime after the events of the comics, undead Richtofen teleports to Groom Lake, where it's revealed in the map classified that the original Ultimis crew is alive, having been teleported from Moon after the destruction of Earth. Cornelius Purnell, having recognized Richtofen and Tank Dempsey, keeps them, and the rest of Ultimis, as prisoners of war. After further discovery, the crew has taken in large amounts of Element 115. Richtofen's body is currently still alive, but brain dead. Following the events of Buried, it is revealed in an audio log from Tank Dempsey that the crew is traumatized by the events of Moon, having felt betrayed by Richtofen and puzzling his actions following the destruction of the Earth. However, in an audio log revealed by Purnell, a guard witnessed a zombie enter the Groom Lake facilities and approach the cell of the brain-dead Richtofen seconds later, transferring his soul into the body, turning the zombie into a pile of ash. Richtofen awakens, making a loud noise and cackling, thus Richtofen returning back to his body for the first time after transferring souls since Moon. But now, he's part human, part zombie. When Takeo expresses confusion on how they are back on the Earth despite blowing it up, Dempsey simply puts it as more time travel BS. Dempsey is also confused on how Richtofen got his body back despite witnessing him switching souls with Samantha. Moments later, the Primis crew teleport in the cell, being led by Primis Nikolai. Reuniting with the post-revelations Primis Richtofen, Ultimis Richtofen appears to recognize his counterpart. After seeing him, he states, "You, oh Shyster." After uniting the team as one and telling the Ultimis crew that they must leave quickly, Primis Nikolai says that a war must be fought, with Dempsey saying, "War? What kind of war?" Primis Nikolai replies by saying, "A war, unlike anything you have ever seen. The Great War." The two groups turn and face each other, each of the two counterparts staring at each other in line. Both the Ultimis and Primis versions of Richtofen, alongside their comrades, made their way to Camp Edward in Nevada in an attempt to gain access to the elemental shard. There, they were assisted by the Broken Arrow AI Rushmore in crafting special variants of the Raygun Mark II, as well as defeating Cornelius Purnell, who had taken control over the undead in the facility and renamed himself Avogadro. Meanwhile, the child version of Richtofen that was in Agatha was, alongside with Samantha, teleported to Camp Edward by Maxis in an attempt to save the children from a wrathful Dr. Monty. All three Richtofens were present when Samantha gave a speech regarding the group's plan to destroy the Ether and kill Monty. Sometime after their journey to Camp Edward, Ultimis and Primis made their way to a forest, where they celebrated the eventual destruction of Element 115 and of the Apothecans. All of them were poisoned to death to bring about the collapse of the multiverse, save the children, Primis Nikolai and Ultimis Richtofen. Ultimis Richtofen then awakened Victus, who was still at Alcatraz, and teleported them near Tunguska. From there, he instructed the crew to build the Agathan device, and thanked Stullinger for complimenting him. He then proceeded to laugh menacingly, having returned to his undead form as Undead Richtofen. Elsewhere in the forest, Nikolai informed Samantha, with Eddie nearby, that she was the only person who was able to kill the one who perpetuated all of this, none other than Nikolai himself. After Victus retrieves the Agathan device, it is transported to Undead Richtofen and Primis Nikolai. With the rest of the crew poisoned and dead around them, Ultimus Richtofen informed Stullinger that he hadn't forgotten about him or his friends. Nikolai then informed Richtofen that it was time for the multiverse to end. As Victus were banished into the Dark Ether, Richtofen apologized to Stullinger for deceiving him before Nikolai shot him with the Welling, marking the end of his story. Interestingly though, he told the others he did not have a last-minute moment of betrayal, a rabbit in his hat. He accepted his defeat. He accepted the collapse of the multiverse. Is there another reason, or did he finally see the error of his ways? This brings us to the storyline of Primis Richtofen. Primis Richtofen's bio reads, in a former life, the sadistic Dr. Edward Richtofen stood at the forefront of research into the mysterious Element 115 and its potential applications for Group 935's Wonder Weapon program. Now, his grand plans for a brave new world guide him down a dangerous path towards an uncertain future. His story begins in the Call of Duty Zombies universe sense in Dimension 63. On July 17th, 1898, Edward Richtofen's parents died. Guiding himself, on August 11th, 1906, Richtofen began his studies at Heidelberg University under the tutelage of Dr. Ludwig Maxis. Having lost his parents, Richtofen came to view him as a father figure. Years later, on July 3rd, 1912, Richtofen and Maxis joined Group 935, an organisation dedicated to improving the human condition. On August 25th, 1916, the journal of a Sir Pablo Marinas, Knight of the Great War between humanity and the Apothecans from the 13th century, is discovered by Group 935. In Pablo's journal, he documented the Great War, including all he had learned about the Keepers, Apothecans, and Element 115. Regarding Element 115's power, he noted that a site in northern France contained massive deposits of the element. On March 23rd, 1917, using information gathered from Pablo's journal, Group 935 began work at a dig site in northern France, where they discover a series of underground tombs. A month later, after finding the main chamber, but unable to access it, soldiers listen to a gramophone to alleviate their frustration. When listening to a recording of La Source Noire, the entrance to the main chamber unexpectedly opens. The camp's exposure to Element 115 began. Using information from Pablo's journal and the tomb's main chamber, Maxis drew schematics for the creation of 4 elemental staffs and instructed Richtofen to begin their construction. On September 22nd, 1917, Richtofen noted that in spite of Group 935's progress at the dig site, he was troubled by Maxis' growing obsession with Pablo's diary and with Element 115. On May 13th, 1918, Richtofen learned from Pablo's journal that the northern France dig site may be the single largest deposit of Element 115 on Earth. He believes this explains why it has affected so many at the site. Maxis, who is now completely obsessed with a girl in his head named Samantha Maxis, coincidentally, who is his daughter from the original timeline, who had travelled through a rift to gain his help in freeing her from Agatha, and on May 14th, 1918, swore he would not serve Group 935's mission in order to advance his own agenda with Samantha. On June 4th, 1918, Element 115 completely awakened the Undead Knights from the Great War and quickly consumed the camp. Maxis was rendered catatonic by the element. Richtofen removed his brain before he turned. American spy Tank Dempsey, Russian spy Nikolai Belinsky, and Japanese spy Takeo Masaki unite with Richtofen on the battlefield and help free Samantha from her imprisonment in Agatha. The four uniting marks the return of Primis from the original Great War, as the group were reincarnated versions of them. Samantha, who had been freed and sent to the house, then sent Primis to the next destination. Maxis's brain arrived in Agatha, and Dr. Monty, the original keeper, decided to step in. Monty brought Maxis's brain to the house and wiped the Maxis corrupted by the Dark Ether from existence. Monty revealed his plan to build his perfect world and instructed Maxis to retrieve a book called the Chronorium, which contains the location of another artifact known as the Summoning Key. Maxis in turn relayed this task to Richtofen. Richtofen, through unknown means, manages to make contact with his undead staff in the original timeline and instructs him to pursue Victis. At the same time, he also instructs Stullinger to get the others to follow his plan. They begin to jump to a Broken Arrow base on June 24th, 1996 to acquire a shard of Element 115, then arrive at the Empty Earth, where an alternate Maxis built Zero Base to house various artifacts, including the Chronorium. Once the Chronorium is acquired, Richtofen then makes his way back to Dimension 63 in July 4th, 1941, with the construction of the Alcatraz lab completed. At the time, the Victis group arrives and hands him the Chronorium. He then reads it and discovers various excerpts documenting the fates of Richtofen and various other individuals. He then writes, "I know what I must do," in one of the pages, then travels briefly to Zero Base to meet his undead self and acquire 4 blood vials of Victis. He then jumps back to Alcatraz in Dimension 63 in 1934, 8 days before the execution of Billy Hanson, Salvatore Sal De Luca, and Michael Finn O'Leary, and acquires blood samples of the latter two, contained in 4 blood vials. He travels further back in time to give 2 of them to a younger version of himself. He jumps back to July 4th, 1941, and then puts the Victis group in cryogenic sleep, preserving them for when they are next needed. Moments after, a future version of Richtofen, along with Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, arrive and receive blood samples of the Victis group from the younger Richtofen. Once the Primis group leaves, Richtofen then sets off for his next destination, Morgue City in Dimension 63, where he attempts to intercept a reporter who has just retrieved the key, locked inside a crate sealed with magic. In self-defense, Richtofen killed the reporter and placed the crate containing the key in a truck in the back alley of East Street in Morgue, due to being unable to break through the magic seal. Richtofen watched behind the scenes as 4 individuals residing in Morgue City are manipulated by the Shadow Man into using the key to unleash the Apothegons upon the city, and their attempts to assist the Keepers in preventing the apocalypse. After the massive Apothegon in the sky was defeated, Richtofen arrives and swipes the key from the Keepers, thanking the 4 Morgue residents for their efforts before leaving. With the key acquired, Richtofen then jumps to Dimension 2210 and acquires an innocent Richtofen soul, which would be sent to the house and be known as Eddie. As Eddie is collected within the summoning key, the Shadow Man whispers, "I'll be seeing you." Richtofen apparently did not know the Shadow Man was in there, but since he read the Chronorium, he probably did know, and this was fulfilling his promise he made to him long ago, and allowed the cycle to continue because he found no way, because he knew the only way for the cycle to be broken was their death, which no one had the guts to do, Monty and him, although eventually he would finally make the right choice. Primis Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo, having been teleported to the original dimension in 1943 and somehow learned of Richtofen's travels, formed a plan to stop him. In the following 2 years, they travelled across dimensions, following Richtofen's trails and encountering various versions of himself at the same time. They return to the original dimension and meet at the Dury's facility on October 13th, 1945, just moments after Ultimis Richtofen trapped Maxis and Samantha in the teleporter with Fluffy. Dempsey, Nikolai, and Takeo confront Ultimis Richtofen, telling him that there is a chain of events that must be carried out, and prompt him to awaken the original versions of themselves. As the zombie horde approach them from outside, Richtofen ignores the three's warnings and turns on the teleporter, only to find Primis Richtofen inside. Primis Richtofen then shoots the Ultimis Richtofen in the head, killing him instantly. This triggers a fracturization across the original timeline. While the group expresses disappointment in Richtofen for tampering with history, he defends his actions, believing that what he does will be to secure a better future. But this is, at the end of the day, one version of the cycle. There's actually a radio on the Giant in which Nikolai talks about the fact he has killed many Richtofens before, but he passes this off as just a 115 delusion. He even makes reference of a Captain Hook Richtofen, as well as many other iterations. There are an infinite versions of cycles that have played out, with an infinite amount of universes in each of them, and things don't have to play exactly the same for the cycle to perpetuate. For example, the Call of Duty Zombies comics depict one version of the cycle in which Ultimis Richtofen joined the other Primis characters instead of his Primis self. Maybe this could have been an alternative version of the cycle where he killed Primis Richtofen on the Giant instead of the other way around. The copy of the Zombies timeline that Trek provided us with the Zombies Chronicles states it is excerpt 1023-816-121016 of the Chronorium, stated in the bottom right hand corner of the page, signed by Dr. Monty in the top left corner, showing us that by the time that the cycle breaks, this is the bare minimum number of cycles that had happened. However, for all we know, there was many more than this. While the group expresses disappointment in Richtofen for tampering with history, he defends his actions, believing that what he does will be to secure a better future. While the others fend off the zombies, Richtofen pretends to use the summoning key to acquire the original Richtofen's soul, which Dempsey notices. Eventually, the four activate a beacon in the facility, allowing Maxis from another dimension to locate them. After acquiring a giant robot from the Dury's facility, the four pursued the scattered remains of Group 935 to Griffin Castle, codenamed Eagle's Nest, on November 5th, 1945. The Germans had captured Ultimis Dempsey's cryochamber from being experimented on by Ultimis Richtofen and planned to bring him to Griffin Station, now fully ran by Dr. Groff in Ultimis Richtofen's absence, with Primis close behind until a German soldier fires a Panzerschreck at the giant robot, disabling it before it could retrieve Ultimis Dempsey. After arriving at Griffin Castle, the young four watch as a rocket containing the Ultimis Dempsey launches to the moon. After making radio contact with Dr. Groff, Richtofen masquerades as his Ultimis older self in order to fool Groff. However, Groff becomes suspicious of Richtofen's change of personality and announces him as an imposter. Using the Death Ray, the young four manage to bring the rocket containing the Ultimis Dempsey back to the castle, much to Groff's anger, who activates a failsafe so they couldn't touch the chamber. Using the Vril device obtaining from the crash site, the young four awaken a Ghost Keeper and help it return it to its physical form before it returns the favor by bringing the MPD from the moon to the castle. However, the Keeper becomes corrupted, forcing the four to battle it, eventually defeating it. After defeating it, Groff expresses his extreme anger, vowing to destroy them and the castle itself. In order to tie up these loose ends, the four use the summoning key to launch several missiles towards the moon, destroying it, ultimately destroying Griffin Station and killing any Group 935 scientist at the station, including Groff. After walking towards Ultimis Dempsey's cryochamber, Richtofen activates the summoning key, forcing the others to levitate in the air. Here, Richtofen's plan is revealed to the others. Richtofen plans to kill the Ultimis versions of themselves to be put in the summoning key, like he supposedly did with his own at the Dury's facility. When Dempsey himself sadly put his older self down, Richtofen briefly comforted him after it was done, showing that he has laid his previous dislike of Dempsey off to the side. Richtofen then captures the Ultimis Dempsey's soul in the key. Richtofen and the other three then travel to a different fractured timeline, to an island, arriving on a Japanese vessel heading for a Division 9 facility on October 18th, 1945, before being caught and the summoning key being taken away from him. A brief fight ensues with the Japanese soldiers, with Richtofen burning one alive before he notices the key rolling towards the ocean. Luckily, Takeo had managed to barely catch the key by his fingertips, much to Richtofen's relief. The four then are forced to swim to a nearby island after the ship blows up. Lastly, Richtofen was present when the Ultimis Takeo Misaki was cured from being a thrasher to collect his soul. After the Ultimis Takeo honourably sacrificed himself for a better future, Richtofen then preserved his soul. Initially, Dempsey suggested going after the Ultimis Nikolai, but Richtofen said a chain of events must be set in motion. Realising that he wants to save his three comrades from their eventual fate, Richtofen then takes them to Alcatraz on July 4th, 1941, where he meets his younger self and acquires the victors' blood samples. Primis then jumped to another fractured timeline in a war-torn Stalingrad on November 6th, 1945 to kill the Ultimis Nikolai and place his soul in the summoning key. Eventually, the four are teleported out of the sky and parachute in front of Ultimis Nikolai's mech while he is distracted with vodka and listening to the Ace of Spades on his radio. Upon seeing them, the Ultimis Nikolai attempts to kill them until a dragon throws him into a building. After encountering Sophia, Richtofen and the group assist her in acquiring interdimensional travel knowledge, helping her to reunite with Maxis. Later, Richtofen and the others make a temporary truce with the Ultimis Nikolai in order to kill the dragon. Afterwards, Richtofen and the other three demand Ultimis Nikolai to surrender, to which he refuses and betrays them. After the Primis Nikolai kills his Ultimis self, Richtofen opens a portal in the sky with Maxis' help and lights a beacon from the summoning key which releases the Ultimis Nikolai, Takeo and Dempsey. After this, he calls to Maxis, telling him that they'll be meeting him soon. Soon after the events of Gorod Krovi, Richtofen along with the rest of the Primis crew finally arrive at the house. There, Richtofen reunites with Maxis. The two then destroy the MTD to ensure the house would remain safe. Letting his guard down, Richtofen leaves the soul key on a table, unaware of who was trapped within. The voice inside calls out to Maxis and influences him due to his lack of a soul, making him easy to control. Maxis opens the soul key, releasing the Shadow Man inside. Exploring his new surroundings, he opens a portal to Agatha and unleashes an Apothecan invasion. Monty enlists the help of the Primis crew to defeat the Shadow Man and save his perfect world from destruction. With the help of Ludwig, Maxis, and Sophia, Primis manages to kill the Shadow Man and banish the Apothecans to places unknown. As the world returns to normal, Monty becomes concerned as Primis remains in front of him. Noticing the empty blood vials, he becomes angered, claiming that they are putting his realm at risk. Initially, he decides to simply wipe them from existence, but decides to instead send them somewhere else. The four then end up in the year 1299, in northern France, just as the Great War comes to an end, causing the cycle to continue. The blood allows it to perpetuate. So before the events of Gorod Krovi, Primis encounters the pocket dimension of Alcatraz to pick up the blood vials, ending up far from the intended target. The group enters the underground lab and finds another Richtofen. He gives the vials to the group and instructs Richtofen to reread the chronorium. Richtofen scans through the pages, exclaiming that pages have changed and that his blood is needed. He becomes enraged and throws the chronorium before hearing a horde of zombies approaching. The group then makes their escape, but before entering the portal, Brutus destroys it, trapping the group within the twisted version of Alcatraz. Beside a mysterious machine known as the Dark Mechanism, the Primis crew battle against Brutus, whom is being resurrected time and time again. Richtofen realized what the chronorium meant and that the machine was intended to draw his blood and stepped inside, sacrificing himself to free the others. And a fun fact, the cycle was only able to break due to the mobsters breaking their cycle in their pocket dimension on Alcatraz. This allowed the overarching cycle to to break because it did not allow Primis to head there after Zetsubo no Shima to collect the blood vials. And that is what caused the Chronorium's pages to change. The Chronorium, however, was actually telling them how to continue the cycle, which did result in this time Richtofen having to have his blood sacrificed. However, Richtofen would be no longer in charge of the Chronorium. With Brutus finally unable to resurrect, the rest of Primis is joined by a post-Revelations Richtofen, who awakened from a cryogenic chamber which he had been sent to from the Great War. Taking a moment to realize where he was, he would soon realize he was in a lab under Alcatraz and appeared to be exited at the situation, stating, "Oh Scheiße, mein head, where, when am I? The lab, Alcatraz, this is Wonderpa. Let's investigate, shall we?" Wanting to see what was occurring, he would then run up to and enter the area in which the other Primis members were engaging the Warden. Using a gemstone to free the zombie spirits from Alcatraz and take down the Warden, post-Revelations Richtofen informed them that the future had changed. The future Richtofen handed Nikolai the Chronorium, telling him he would need to read it to defeat Monty, and that Nikolai had to keep his soul to defeat Dr. Monty. However, the way we can interpret this, considering the Chronorium told them how to perpetuate the cycle before, is that Nikolai purposefully then knew what he had to do and did the opposite of what the Chronorium told them, realizing that it was them who were perpetuating the cycle. Considering that the Chronorium was made by the Keepers, it was in Monty's benefit to continue the cycle to ensure his perfect world perpetuates. So it makes sense that the purpose for it was for the reader to be granted with the knowledge on how to perpetuate said cycle. The future Richtofen explained that the cycle was broken and that he wished he could say he was sorry to his younger self. While telling him this, he would also be taking the summoning key and blood vials from him. The remainder of the Primis members and the original Dimension 63 Richtofen entered through one portal each, leaving the new Richtofen alone and scared. The machine continued to drain his blood. In order to prepare for the coming battle, Primis makes a stop at Groom Lake to gain some allies. Within Hangar 4, the Ultimis crew were being held seemingly after the events of Moon, with Richtofen also retaining his body. As Ultimis Nikolai expresses glee at being able to drink uninterrupted, Primis Nikolai emerged from a portal asking his alternate self if drowning his sorrows in vodka is the best choice. The Primis crew rallies their alternative selves and recruits them to fight in the coming battle. Primis Richtofen, as well as the rest of the Primis members, except for Nikolai, appear silent during this meeting. He does all of the talking to their Ultimis counterparts. As they each face their alternative selves, Ultimis Dempsey asks Primis Nikolai, "What kind of war?" To which he replies, "A war unlike any other you have seen. A great war." Both the Ultimis and Primis versions of Richtofen, alongside their comrades, made their way to Camp Edward in Nevada in an attempt to gain access to the Elemental Shard. There, they were assisted by the Broken Arrow, AI, Rushmore, and crafting special variants of the Raygun Mark II, as well as defeating Cornelius Pennell, who had taken control over the undead in the facility and renamed himself Avogadro. Meanwhile, Eddie, the child version of Richtofen that was in Agatha, was, along with Samantha, teleported to Camp Edward by Maxis in an attempt to save the children from a wrathful Dr. Monty. All three Richtofens were present when Samantha gave a speech regarding the group's plan to destroy the Ether and kill Monty. Sometime after their journey to Camp Edward, Ultimis and Primis made their way to a forest, where they celebrated the eventual destruction of Element 115 and the Apothecans, all of them unconscious, save for the children, Primis Nikolai and Ultimis Richtofen. Later, Nikolai informed Samantha with Eddie nearby that she was the only person who was able to kill the one who perpetuated all of this. After Victus retrieves the Agathan device, it is transported to Ultimis Richtofen and Primis Nikolai, with the rest of the crew having apparently poisoned and dead around them, including Primis Richtofen. And that is the conclusion of Primis Richtofen's story. Of course, at the end, it coincided with Ultimis Richtofen's story, so there was a bit of repetition there. Likewise, this is kind of where Eddie Richtofen's story picks up similarly. So now finally, let's dive into the life of Eddie. the entire timeline of the life of Eddie Richtofen so far. Unlike the versions of Ultimis and Primis Richtofens that we saw in the prior Etherverse, this Richtofen's life is largely shrouded in mystery at this point, but I plan to use plot points from Black Ops Cold War as well as Vanguard to help shed some light on his mysterious past, and use that information to figure out his plans for the future. This version of Richtofen is the only version left in existence, as all prior versions were decimated from existence at the end of Tag der Toten. This video does require you to already be somewhat familiar with the events of the Cold War Zombie storyline though, so if you aren't sure or need a refresher, you can check out the link in this video's description to watch my entire Cold War Zombie storyline video and come back to watch this video after. The story of Eddie truly begins back during the Ether storyline. He was a young and innocent boy living a relatively normal life in what was known as Dimension 2210, until one day he was visited by an older version of himself. This version of himself, who we know as Primis Richtofen, gained his trust so that he would lower his guard, allowing Primis Richtofen to take his life and place his soul within the summoning key. From there, Primis Richtofen would take the soul to the house in Agatha to be safe with Dr. Monty. However, unlike the other souls there, he was already an innocent child, preventing him from ever being transformed by Dr. Monty. Remember this detail as it is important, and we will return back to this much later in the video. There, he would meet Ludwig Maxis, who introduced him to his young daughter, Samantha. The two became friends and spent most of their time playing with toys gifted to them by Monty. Interestingly, some of these toys seem to bear a resemblance to his other, older counterparts. Samantha described her father as introducing her to a new friend that just arrived, his name being Edward. She described him as being nice, but not liking to share the toys.
I didn't even get my turn.
Another important detail is the timing of Eddie's arrival to the house. While during the events of the Giants, Richtofen pretends to place his own soul in the summoning key, by this time Eddie was already in the house alongside Samantha. This point, while seemingly minuscule while the cycle was continuing, would prove to be the most important factor of Eddie's soul once the cycle was broken. During the cycle, the souls of Tank Dempsey, Takeo Masaki, and Nikolai Belinsky would each be captured and sent to the house after Nikolai's soul was captured. There, the souls would be transformed into children by Monty and met up with the others. They were all quick to befriend each other and all of the children would live in peace. However, this would be disrupted by the arrival of the Shadow Man and the Apothecan invasion of the universe. The Apothecans would be stopped and defeated once and for all by Primis, but sent to the Great War. However, when the cycle was broken, things went awry. He and Samantha still lived in relative peace until Primis Nikolai began his master plan to rid the universe of Element 115 and to solve the paradox of the multiverse. Monty soon found out that Primis and Maxis were working behind his back. Feeling that the children would be threatened by this, Maxis brought Eddie and Samantha into the basement, teleporting them out of Agatha and to Camp Edward before Monty devoured him. When they arrived, Samantha destroyed the facility in anger and promised to Eddie that they would fight the Great War and defeat Monty. Eddie and Samantha would accompany Primis and Ultimis to a forest where they would celebrate their imminent victory against the nightmares of the Ether. Eddie was also present when Nikolai asked Samantha for a favor to be the one to kill the one who perpetrated all of this. Secretly, Nikolai had poisoned the rest of his comrades, knowing that their lives kept the multiverse together through the elemental shard. After using the Agathan device to destroy the summoning key and the multiverse in the process, Eddie would be present as Nikolai had Samantha mercy kill him with a welling. She then told him to look away as she did the deed. As the multiverse collapsed, the Agathan device presented the children with a way out of the dark ether, thanks to Nikolai, the way through. Eddie being in the house earlier than the other souls, this puts him in place to be one of the only two surviving characters at the end of Tag der Toten and allows a Richtofen to live on past the end of the Ether storyline, as he held hands with Samantha and walked through to the new universe thanks to the sacrifice of our heroes, to begin new lives free of the cycle forever. The nature of events in Eddie's life from this point leading up to his appearance to the lead of Requiem are a bit of a mystery, but we can make some strong educated guesses based upon what we know of him now. A lot of what I'm about to discuss are merely inferences, whilst likely very close to actuality, there may be some discrepancies. He, alongside Samantha, seemingly appeared in the Dark Ether story timeline in the 1960s, parallel to the date that Tag der Toten took place. Sometime in 1965, believe for them, this transition to a new universe after Tag der Toten was seemingly instantaneous. We know that after Tag der Toten, this new universe was created from scratch. This is because Saraxis mentions to us in Vanguard that when the artifacts from the prior storyline arrived in the Dark Ether, such as the Mishu box, they learned of the outside world, and their first viewing of humans were Neanderthals. Eddie and Sam simply did not reappear in time until it was congruent with the year they'd left. Once Eddie did reappear, it seems likely that he and Samantha parted ways relatively early in their lives, as she mentions growing up in an orphanage in Germany alone. The orphanage she spent her time in, as well as the university she went to as a child, Heidelberg University in Germany, are both the same orphanage and university that the prior universe's Richtofen went to. This thematic swap allows us to speculate that Eddie's early life could perhaps have been much like Samantha's in the prior universe. This would mean Eddie likely was adopted and grew up in a home with at least one parent, thus making him the only Richtofen to not grow up an orphan. These factors would result in this Eddie Richtofen becoming distinctively different than any prior incarnation, and now the only Richtofen left after Primis and Ultimis Richtofen were both wiped from existence after Tag der Toten. This family were also likely Americans, considering the high rank that Eddie holds within the American government, and these positions largely being kept away from immigrants at the time. This can be interpreted due to the less Germanized and almost American accent that we hear from his distorted voice in the intel when he was interrogating Samantha. We know that Eddie is also fluent in Russian. From here, Eddie would grow up into a man, serving time in the military as a pilot known as the Blue Baron, a reference to the real-life pilot of the Red Baron, and the fact that Richtofen's representative color has always been blue.
I told you before, their eyes should be blue.
Using this to garner trust in the American government, he would find his way into the high-ranking position of Associate Deputy Director at the Department of Extra-Regular Activities, a shadow subgroup under the Directorate of Science and Technology, specializing in clandestine sciences and the paranormal. It was likely around this point that Eddie also met the group who he is answering to throughout Cold War Zombies and who we believe to be the modern-day incarnation of the Société Occult. In meeting these people and working for the Department of Extra-Regular Activities, Eddie would also manage to acquire various Dark Ether artifacts and journals from the era of Vanguard Zombies, and likely at least part of the Tome of Rituals as well. We know Eddie holds these objects by the time Requiem is formed, as he places all of them in Requiem's archives, and likely used the artifacts to create the technological field upgrades used in Cold War Zombies to harness their retrospective powers. At some point around this time, Eddie would also likely have met his wife. While we do not know much about her, we see both a wife and son featured in a photograph with Eddie on his desk at the end of Forsaken, so we know he must have been with her long enough to get married and have a child, a boy named Samuel. Potentially Eddie gave his son this name in memory of Samuel Stullinger, as some of the last words Eddie would have heard in the old multiverse would have been Ultimis Richtofen apologizing to Stullinger as he and the other members of Victis faded away into the Dark Ether, the guilt of which may have haunted the young Eddie throughout his new life. This family that he would build during this time would prove to be a major driving force behind his actions from this point forward. Sometime after 1979, Samantha is contacted by Gregory Weaver. He has a target and needs intel from her to find them. This target was seemingly none other than Eddie himself, although we don't know the reason as to why he was a target. It is worth noting at this point that in my earlier storyline video, I suggested the following events took place in Iran, since that is where Samantha and Weaver originally met. However, as new story information has come to light and we have had time to dwell on it, it seems more likely that this is not the case, since we know that Samantha leaves Iran with Weaver and presumably goes back to America in 1979, and this takes place after that. So as we go forward, keep in mind that these events may actually have taken place on American soil. Samantha gives Weaver the intel on his location and informs him that the target's son will be out of the house and with his mother, giving Weaver the time he needs to accomplish his mission. Weaver goes to take out his target, but something goes horribly wrong. Weaver, after believing he had succeeded in his assassination attempt, began to burn the house down behind him to cover his tracks. It was at this point, however, the failure in his intel was made clear to him. As he fled, he realized his intel was only half correct. The target's son was with his mother, but both of them were still inside the house. He ran to Samantha's apartment and spent the rest of the night crying in his arms. Samantha says she expects this night will come back to haunt the both of them. If this target was indeed Eddie, it explains the scar along his throat you can see on his Cold War Zombies model, as well as the other injuries on his face, and also what happened to his wife and son. Maybe Eddie likely chose to use the knowledge of the Dark Ether that he had since he used to be in control of the Ether in the old Ether story, and he used this knowledge to save his son and sent him into the Dark Ether to manifest as an ethereal orb. If Eddie didn't manage to do this, I wonder if Samantha could have maybe opened up a portal, or a portal opened up in some other fashion, but that doesn't really make much sense. We don't know exactly how Samuel got into the Dark Ether. All we can do is speculate right now, but it does seem like he somehow got into there. We previously believed that his son may have been trapped inside an artifact, that being a rabbit named Mr. Peaks, who has replaced Samantha's teddy bear in the mystery box and also assisted us with rewards throughout Cold War Zombies and even on Shinonuma Reborn. This rabbit named Mr. Peaks represents the promise to his son that he will rescue him and that Samuel will escape the Dark Ether based on an old Dark Ether saying from long ago.
Well, I can honestly say I never imagined being in this position. I mean, look at us, all body. I'm not going to apologize for all the terrible things I have done, because frankly, I'm not sorry for anything. Yeah, I've had the time of my life. No, I know you'll probably never really trust me, and even now, you'll be expecting me to pull some last-minute rabbit out of a hat. A big rabbit of betrayal.
Yeah, no kidding.
Thank you, Dennis. I knew I could rely on you. So, do you have a rabbit of betrayal? If I'm honest, I've been expecting one since we all got together. Sadly, no. I am all out of rabbits.
Ultimis Richtofen claimed he was all out of rabbits when he didn't have a last-minute moment of betrayal in the ending of Tag der Toten, where they all had to die to reset the universe. The Forsaken is aware of this infamous saying that has clearly echoed throughout the Dark Ether.
But all good things must come to an end. As the old Dark Ether saying goes, you're all out of rabbits.
Was them or me?
Do you know what that means? It means no more escapes. This time, no one gets out alive. Bye-bye.
Now it seems that Richtofen does indeed remember this, but this time he does have a rabbit in his hat. This rabbit could be the key to Samuel's survival, keeping him safe in a dark place, and the note describing this just so happens to be burnt, just as him and his mother apparently were. Mr. Peaks is described as living in the boy's hat, and we even see an emote showing Mr. Peaks being pulled from a hat. So this has to be a reference to the quote from Ultimis Richtofen. So what exactly is Richtofen's grand scheme that he's waiting to pull from the hat? And we know that Mr. Peaks has been described as keeping the boy safe in a dark place, that being the Dark Ether. So here's the thing, what if the rabbit, Mr. Peaks, is actually Cortifex and Syraxis' child and not Eddie's son? Mr. Peaks is present in the mystery box in Vanguard Zombies well before the events of Black Ops Cold War and before Samuel seems to have been sent into the Dark Ether. This means that Mr. Peaks can't be anything to do with Samuel himself, although he might be keeping Samuel safe. It's not Samuel itself, it's not his Dark Ether artifacts like we previously thought, as it's been in the Dark Ether since Vanguard Zombies. This would be a big plot twist and would make a lot of sense. Two children, one from two Dark Ether entities, one human, keeping each other safe in the dark place. It would explain as to why the orb is attracted to the rabbit in the second Outbreak main quest, and it would also explain as to why the two are bonded together, because they're both children, and even though one is the child of a Dark Ether entity, one is a human, they can bond over that childness that they both possess and that innocence, and have more in common, and they both got abandoned. Just as Cal has pointed out on Twitter, given Cortifex has an innate ability to transform the physical makeup of a living being into something else, such as the Decimator getting turned into a shield, but still alive, he could have done something similar to his unwanted child and actually turned his son into the rabbit, as we do see that Mr. Peaks has actual teeth. He is ostensibly alive, and he exists at the time of Vanguard Zombies. So like I said, it seems very possible that Mr. Peaks is or was Cortifex and Syraxis' child. As we know, Cortifex did something horrible to it, we just don't know exactly what. People thought he may have just killed it, but this could be what he actually did. Cortifex and Syraxis being a part of the royal bloodline, and Cortifex committing patricide are very interesting facts. It not only implies that there were many lords of the Dark Ether prior to Cortifex, but also that their clan may themselves have taken power from another. It seems like during Black Ops Cold War, Eddie began to make moves to gain some semblance of control over the Dark Ether and find a way to restore his son to life, whilst also getting back at those who hurt him the most. His plans begin to truly take form when the cyclotron at Project End Station was reactivated by Valentina and the Omega Group. As the Dark Ether anomalies began to open around the planet, creating outbreaks and distorting the world around them, the US government scrambled to attempt to respond. Eddie took advantage of the situation and used his place in the DSNT to get into a meeting with high-ranking government officials and get them to place him as the director of Requiem. Requiem would be the CIA's way of combating the outbreaks worldwide. Eddie was given free reign to choose who would lead the departments of Requiem, and he took this opportunity to set up his revenge on Weaver and Sam, as well as chose the most talented people he could find. Weaver actually previously had a kill order against him by the CIA, part of Operation Charybdis, as they deemed him a national threat to security, but Eddie personally had this designation as an enemy combatant rescinded. Around the same time operations at Requiem began, Eddie would also contact an agent of Omega Group, Dr. William Peck. He would offer Dr. Peck a safety net of being able to come back to the US and be given work, in exchange for becoming his mole at Omega Group. Eddie, however, used codenames this entire time, and Peck did not truly realize who he was until the end of our storyline in Forsaken. With the lead up to Firebase Z, Ravenov, seeing the increasing intensity of the experiments in Vietnam, knew he could no longer sit idly by. He made contact with Agent Baxis and began acting as a mole. He agreed to meet her at the outpost where he would be able to produce vital intelligence on Omega. Having been dark for months and knowing it was a risky operation, Sam decided to contact Weaver via telephone and inform him of what she was about to do. Unfortunately for her, this phone call would be exactly what would put her in harm's way. Being a Requiem phone line, the director heard every word and decided it was a perfect opportunity to advance his plan and inform Peck that Maxis would be arriving at the base. He, however, neglected to mention that Ravenov was her contact in Omega. The director would send orders to Peck under his codename, and a multitude of Peck's actions were motivated by orders from Eddie. He actually informed Peck of the weak dimensional veil at Kaysan to be the location of Outpost 25. The most major demand was to throw Samantha into the Dark Ether in Firebase Z rather than interrogate her as Kravchenko ordered. Peck did just as such, after first interrogating and torturing her. This implies that Eddie planned from the beginning for her to end up in the Dark Ether and gain the powers that she would eventually use to secure the defeat of the Forsaken. Around the time of Firebase Z, Carver had started to look into the director's identity, as he found him very suspicious and noted that he spoke Russian, keeping Weaver in the loop with whatever he found. Unbeknownst to him, the director was all too aware of his snooping. Following the events of Firebase Z on November 16th, 1984, meeting Ravenov face to face once again, the strike team successfully acquired the launch keys for the inversion missiles, changing the location to the middle of the Pacific Ocean, far out of harm's way. Just as they are preparing to leave, however, a legion of Tempests begin flying towards the silos through two colossal Dark Ether portals in the sky, joining together into one colossal Tempest, incidentally blocking the silos with large Ethereum power node crystals. The strike team managed to defeat this giant Tempest, in turn clearing the silo blockages and successfully launched the missiles. In the weeks following the event at Ruka, the strike team was cleared to return to active duty after almost facing a court-martial only to be spared by the director of Requiem. Peck wasn't the only contact that Eddie had in Omega Group. Now knowing for sure from Peck's Forsaken intel that Eddie is the mole in Requiem, we can retake a look at the R cipher and get a much clearer context of this conversation. Translated, it says, "Colonel, this threat is real. The entity hides in the darkest depths of the Dark Ether. It is waiting for its moment to enter our world and to consume it as it has its own. That is why it seeks to manipulate us, because only we can let it in. Unless we stop it, it will be our end. I will reach out later. Requiem will have noticed my absence by now." This shows us that the contact who informed Kravchenko of the existence of the Forsaken was in fact Eddie himself. This information would cause Kravchenko's goal to pivot, and rather than simply seek to use the Dark Ether to control the world, he set his eyes directly on the Forsaken, and making sure to defeat him. This was the first part in Eddie's master plan of manipulating Omega Group, placing his pawns in his chess game. Once he had Kravchenko successfully obsessed with the existence of the Forsaken, he communicated more with Dr. Peck, and he had Peck, under the guise of speaking to Zykov, suggest the idea of capturing the Forsaken, rather than killing it. He even constructs the plans for the Forsaken containment chamber that Peck built for Omega Group, that just so happens to look like the mechanical Sophia within the prior Etherverse. This communication between Peck and Kravchenko in the F-Cipher shows just how he did it. Colonel, we are going about this the wrong way. We shouldn't be trying to kill the Forsaken, we should be trying to capture it. Think about it. This could be the most powerful creature from their reality. It is an Elder God. It has power beyond anything we can comprehend. Who knows what could be gained from harvesting it? Zykov says he can help. All he wants from us is to break him free. We should act fast before Requiem takes him upon his offer. While Peck says that Zykov offered to help, and this may be somewhat true, the person who actually designed all the technology used to defeat and capture the Forsaken was Eddie himself. He simply had Peck say that it was Zykov to make Kravchenko go along with the plan much quicker. This would ultimately result in the capture of the Forsaken, and Requiem soldiers taking the containment chamber back to Eddie and the US government. In the climax of Cold War Zombies, initially intended for July 4th of 1985, Kravchenko forced Peck to complete the amplifier and cyclotron an entire month sooner. Driven by his desire to please his superiors, realizing Kravchenko's overwhelming egomania, Peck once again contacted the director and finally makes a deal to secure his extraction to the west. In return, he would give Requiem the exact location and time of Zykov's extraction, as well as letting the director take the containment chamber, as I just stated a second ago. He now realized that this was the director's plan all along, and this was the moment he realized the identity of the director that I mentioned earlier in the video. Ravenov once again made contact with Weaver, informing him of Operation Izbavatel. Unbeknownst to Weaver, the director was already aware of this thanks to Peck, but takes Ravenov's intel as a chance to independently verify the time and the location of this operation. With all his pieces now in play, the director was finally ready to proceed with Operation First Domino. With the Forsaken almost dead, he suddenly let out a burst of energy, almost killing the strike team and rapidly causing outbreak zones to appear across the world. This even causing the total collapse of the Ural Mountains outbreak zones into pure phase. Sam, knowing what she had to do, laments the director's most likely manipulative words that she's a good person before sacrificing herself by entering the anomaly at the Forsaken's core, defeating him but trapping herself in the Dark Ether in the process. With the Forsaken weakened enough, the containment chamber activated, absorbing the Forsaken and sealing him inside. As Requiem celebrated their victory, the director addressed the redacted board of directors and informed them that they have successfully captured the Forsaken, and that Maxis is now locked within the Dark Ether as he intended, meaning she is no longer a problem for Project Janus. The strike team were to be sent to Black Site 13 for indefinite containment, and Requiem was to be shut down, with this mysterious group's agents moving on Weaver, Strauss, Carver, and Gray. Shortly after this, the Requiem heads of department each find themselves arrested by military police and taken away, along with the strike team and Raptor 1, who are similarly apprehended. The director watches this unfold from his screens in his office. Everything went according to plan, picking his case up from his desk, where we can see a photo of his past as an Air Force pilot and another with his wife and son, along with a familiar snow globe of Dr. Monty's house inside it. The director leaves his office, possibly for the last time. Eddie shut down Requiem to now proceed with the next phase of Project Janus. During the course of Cold War's Onslaught maps, Eddie would also enlist one more member into the department of Requiem. During the time that the Echelon facility became overrun with the undead, one SAA analyst named Eric Jaworski would survive the ordeal and make various theories about the events around him. He would report all of this to Requiem in case he did not survive the chaos. H. Meyer, Requiem Station's Berlin officer, would find Eric Jaworski alive, and on the director's orders would send him to Requiem headquarters. From this we can see that Eric Jaworski's wife is truly missing, but we do not know what happened to her, nor if the communications from the Dark Ether were truly her or the Forsaken trying to manipulate him. What is of interest to note is that Eric would be placed under Carver in the containment and security department, and is likely the person next to Carver in the Forsaken's ending cutscene, and we do not see him arrested. Perhaps the director still has plans for him, considering that he saw potential in him, but so far Eric Rick Jaworski has not reappeared in the story since Echelon. The director also spent a large amount of time in the later parts of Cold War's story with Samantha Maxis. It began when Gray had noted strange occurrences with Maxis after she had been rescued from the Dark Ether on Firebase Z, after which Requiem began experimenting on her while she wasn't allowed to be in the field, specifically in one instance a book moving. More importantly, having seen her photos about these events on the Requiem mainframe warns her that people above their pay grade can see them too. Weaver, disappointed in Gray for allowing Sam to get the better of her and enabling the events at Ruka, scolds her and warns her to never cross his path ever again. He also confronted Maxis and, after a heated exchange, confined her to her quarters with no more walks around the facility with her dog. Unfortunately, Gray's warning came too late. By this point, the director had already marked Sam down for special tests. Weaver received new orders from the director of Requiem and, on December 1st, had Maxis taken away for additional testing, based on reports from Gray about the high levels of Ethereum contamination in her bloodstream and changes on a cellular level. As she was taken away, Weaver promised to take care of her dog. On December 3rd, after 2 days of travel, Maxis arrived at Block 8, a classified facility of the CIA built with an Ethereum seal. She was maintained in isolation after she attempted to flee the facility upon arrival. Maxis was subjected to several interrogation sessions led by the director of Requiem to assess her powers. After 15 days, the director managed to push her by stating that nobody at Requiem was caring for her and that she was just a sad little lost girl. Filled with anger, Maxis used her telekinetic abilities to break the glass in her room. The director continued to torture Maxis over the next 2 months in an attempt to awaken her powers gained by the Dark Ether. This included forcing her to kill an Omega soldier with her mind, otherwise her closest, more than a friend Gray, would be shot. During one session, he threatened to shoot her dog if she didn't teleport her somewhere safe. At around this time, Carver begins doing more digging into the exact nature of the Dark Ether. Thanks to his military career, he was the first to recognize the parallel between the power structure in the Dark Ether and that of an army. His question though, who was the commander-in-chief? Carver found that very answer lying on the director's desk, confirming his worst fears. There was an exceptional powerful being at the top, and it was growing in power, the Forsaken. Eddie's experimentations on Sam, in fact, mirrors the concepts in the classic Ether storyline of Richtofen, also experimenting on young Samantha Maxis as a child. The difference this time, however, is that the experimentation seems to have ultimately been for her benefit. Eddie used threats against the life of her dog, Not So Fluffy, as well as Dr. Gray, her love interest in the storyline, to force Samantha's emotions to awaken her true abilities. While initially Samantha did not believe she had powers, Eddie seemed to already know what she was capable of. This, along with the fact that he was the one soul that Dr. Monty did not purify, as we mentioned at the beginning of this video, seems to suggest that he has complete memories of the events of the Ether storyline that he bore witness to, and are using her powers during the events of Black Ops 4 Zombies. This likely resulted in a lot of trauma in his early life and could be motivators for his actions. He even has memory of Samantha's birthday, whilst her memory on the prior multiverse is hazy. Samantha's initial reaction is that the director is evil and cruel, but by the time the experimentation/manipulation was complete and she had better control of her powers, she was grateful to him. She felt that without him, she would never have realized that she was a good soul and would never have awakened her new abilities that would be key in the fight to come. This is clear Stockholm Syndrome. She would eventually use these powers to defeat the Forsaken and secure his capture, but trap herself deep in the Dark Ether as a consequence. Requiem would manage to destroy Omega Group and free the world from the clutches of the Dark Ether and the Forsaken, as well as accomplish many of Eddie's personal goals along the way. This leaves Eddie now in control of the Forsaken inside its containment chamber, Samantha trapped inside the Dark Ether, Weaver in prison with the rest of Requiem Department leads, and the strike team contained in Black Site 13. We do not know where Black Site 13 is, but we can assume it is either in the facilities currently being constructed by him in West Virginia, or the point in the ocean that Peck points to in the final cutscene. It is important to note that it isn't necessarily implied to be a prison, but rather some sort of containment unit, perhaps due to the strike team's exposure to Ethereum. When Dr. Peck is trying to look for some old friends in the Pacific and get a boat from a fisherman, we do not know whether he is acting against or for the director. In my opinion, I do think that he's had a change of heart and is now working against the director in the 5 years in between Forsaken and in the 1990s, where the storyline will then pick back up. Having been a mole for Eddie for quite some time, he will have extensive knowledge on what he is up to more than anyone. And after Eddie secured secured his safety, he may have started delving deeper into what Eddie is up to and uncovered some dark secrets. With his side goals accomplished and Samantha out of the way, Eddie was finally able to return his full focus to his current objective, Project Janus. In ancient Roman religion and myth, Janus is the god of beginnings, gateways, transitions, time, duality, and endings, likely involving opening a large gateway to the Dark Ether. We do not know exactly what Project Janus entails, but what we do know is that he is currently digging underground tunnels in rural West Virginia, importing a lot of resources there, including 5,000 tons of steel as the first stages of his plan. They have been hiring scientists, military personnel, operations personnel, and custodians. They used a cover story of a nuclear power plant tower failing and leaking to evacuate the locals. As predicted, a few locals weren't exactly keen on giving up their land, inserting their rights as American citizens to protect their property. They plan on starting construction on a giant wall. We can do a bit of guessing based on facts we know surrounding Janus and what Eddie is up to here, but I want to save a majority of Project Janus speculation for a separate video entirely and truly give it the time it deserves. Eddie has worked tirelessly throughout the storyline to make sure that Project Janus stays hidden from anyone who is not involved. One example can be seen here in this cipher from Strauss to Gray, where Strauss is making very sure that only Gray will see his communications and that she tells absolutely no one about it. Elizabeth, there is a new directive coming, and I wanted you to hear it from me first. Perhaps it will spare you the initial shock when you are informed in person. There is a new project in development that will require a great deal of our Ethereum reserves. Unfortunately, this means that some of your research will be put on hold indefinitely. You are not the only one affected by this. I have been informed that half of all future Ethereum harvests recovered from my extraction rockets will also be diverted to this project. Now I want to leave you with a question. Be very careful who you mention this to. What do you know about Project Janus? For your eyes only, am I crystal clear? Another key example of just how far he is willing to go to keep Project Janus a secret is the story of the robot Klaus and the CIA agents in Berlin he interacted with in the lead up to Mauer der Toten. These CIA agents initially found a dead drop of documents not intended for them, and these documents went into detail about Project Janus. The CIA agents initially thought it couldn't be real, but their reactions to the documents provide the clearest look at Project Janus we get throughout the storyline. To Maya at Requiem offices on Tuesday. We recovered a communique this evening at one of our dead drops. I don't believe it was meant for us. It's addressed to the Office of Requiem and details a Project Janus. One, I don't know what an Office of Requiem is. I checked the mainframe, but I don't have clearance. And this Project Janus, this can't be real, right? There's some pretty insane stuff in here. You are our guy at HQ. Can you look into this? What should we do here? From Rico. Eddie would in turn steal a robot that Dr. Gray had been working on, codenamed Klaus, and likely implant his own personality onto it as an AI in the same way the Requiem leads had their personalities implanted into the Cerberus wonder weapon. He would then make sure that Klaus handled the situation by sending him an encrypted instruction. From Requiem to Klaus. Subject, complete your mission. You have your orders. The security of Project Janus is your top priority. Contain the situation, find and destroy the intercepted communique, then tie up all loose ends. We cannot allow this to get out. The situation would end up resolved thanks to Klaus destroying whatever documents they found, and one by one killing each CIA agent who had managed to learn of Project Janus, even if they believed it wasn't real. Realizing that Valentina had betrayed him on February 2nd, 1985, in order to put a stop to her, Kravchenko decided to send in Requiem's invincible strike team, after being held prisoner in Potsdam for several weeks by using Raptor 1's life as leverage, who managed to survive the crash. Locating the Berlin End Station lab, they realized Valentina is already within the Dark Ether. They activated Klaus and finished what the CIA agents started, retrieving the components to build an inversion warhead to close the gateway. So this was clearly already an intention of Project Janus anyways. Unfortunately, in order to properly purify the crystals, they would need a being made of concentrated Ethereum. Luckily, Valentina in a new form was just this. They fight and defeat Valentina using her to complete the warhead and have Klaus enter the gateway to detonate the warhead from the other side. Kravchenko, bringing Raptor 1 out into the open, fires at the strike team, believing now is the time to tie up loose ends. The strike team are able to escape, though thanks to Agent Maxis, who, from her cell in Block 8, manifests a portal for them. The director watches this from his office and notes that Project Janus can now proceed succeed, but Maxis's growing powers may be an issue for this. Which is why it's very likely that Eddie implanted his AI into Klaus so that he could handle the situation personally without him being there himself, but merely watching from his office close by. Even with this information, we cannot exactly say what Project Janus entails, but we can say it is likely that the plan is twofold: to satisfy the corporation he is working for, like I said, likely a modern day version of the Societe Occult, and make them think they are using the Dark Ether to their own personal advantage, while he secretly advances his own plans to save his son. Very little is currently known about this corporation. The one time we see their name mentioned in a document, it is redacted and censored out. We also know that Project Janus is very likely either a gateway or heavily dependent on one, considering that the corporation entity he is working with expressed dissatisfaction that he had Requiem close Valentina's gateway in Mauertoten, as well as the massive amounts of Ethereum seemingly required to accomplish it. He responded to the corporation by simply saying that this gateway would have allowed the escape of the Forsaken, and this would be awful for them because the world would surely fall to destruction, and the death of most people in the world would certainly disappoint their stockholders. He did, however, promise he would deliver what they wanted in time. It is very likely that this corporation and the Societe Occult are a modern story version of the classic Illuminati from the Ether storyline, as they are a mysterious organization that Eddie is working with to further his own goals whilst also taking advantage of them, using their mass wealth, connections and assets to further his own agenda. Maybe his entire plan has been trying to rescue his son and in turn free the old ones who Zykov consumed to absorb their powers and become the Forsaken. We know they are returning just as the zealot Spragmos, creator of the Crystal Axe, prophesied. After, thanks to Eddie's nudging, we trapped him in the containment chamber and thus freed them. Eddie may have wanted to free them to try to contact Cortifex, who's likely probably going to be Zykov's first consumption in the final map in Vanguard Zombies, which is obviously a prequel to Cold War Zombies. And the reason for Eddie doing this could possibly be to trying to find a way to rescue his son through Mr. Peaks. Samantha describes the boy as feeling like they are scared but dangerous. Maybe Mr. Peaks helped us on the maps because he wanted us to free the old ones to potentially get back at Cortifex for trapping him, or maybe he's still loyal to him or even unaware of what he did. But I think probably the former is more likely, since Samantha has described him as being dangerous. He probably has it out for Cortifex. And the thing is, we know that Zykov consumes all of the old ones, but does that also include all of the old ones that we see in Vanguard Zombies that are obviously in the artifacts that are helping us? What this means is that Syraxis may also be freed and come back after the events of Black Ops Cold War Zombies in the 90s. And now that she has her memories back, what if she wants to rescue Mr. Peaks and she wants to rescue her child, and maybe she could even be helping us in the events of the sequel to Cold War Zombies? Maybe some of the old ones may be against us, some of them might be trying to help us, and they could kind of battle it out against each other. But there's definitely going to be a weird dynamic there. The DG2 schematics that were left behind that we learn about on Shinonuma Reborn, despite direct orders from von List, leader of the Nazi group Die Wahrheit, is very convenient, almost as convenient as all Die Wahrheit personnel vanishing mysteriously after blowing up Cortifex's temple in Egypt. Well, there may be people sabotaging Die Wahrheit from the inside, and they could potentially be members of the Societe Occult. The thing is, with Shinonuma, Trek has just retconned the Chaos story to be a part of the Dark Ether story, as Kraft is a big fan of fellow demonologist Alistair Rhodes, father of Scarlet Rhodes, who studied the Sentinel artifacts that created a stoppage in time where the zombie outbreaks would occur. On Ancient Evil, he was frozen in stone by Medusa though. Maybe there's just a new version of him in the Dark Ether timeline, but the actual events of the Chaos story existed in one of the universes in the prior multiverse that got rebooted to a singular universe thanks to our heroes on Tag to Toten. Although, let's run with the idea that Chaos could have actually happened in the Dark Ether timeline and not in the prior multiverse. Well, the Societe Occult had a crisis during the 1920s, and the thing is, Chaos was set in 1912. Could the crisis potentially be linked to the events of Medusa that probably transpire after Ancient Evil, of which it seems like she was going to head to the Great Library of Alexandria next, which just so happens to be set in Egypt? It does feel very weird with the Chaos story potentially being part of the Dark Ether story, but this could potentially work, as Kalanine has pointed out on Twitter. The Order in the Chaos story could potentially be the Societe Occult, which would be a huge retcon, but again, this is just a theory, this is not confirmed, but it has some interesting implications if true. But since the Chaos story has been retconned, what if the events of World War II Zombies also get retconned into the Dark Dark Ether story, I could see Trek doing something like that. As far as the future goes, the most important things to watch for to find more of Eddie Richtofen's plan will be the way that the Elder Gods in Vanguard Zombies leave their artifacts, as they're probably going to get consumed by Zykov at some point, as Eddie will likely have to accomplish something similar to rescue Samuel, or maybe for Mr. Peak's, Cortifex's, and Syraxis's son to be rescued from the Dark Ether Rabbit too. The question is though, is the goal of Project Janus just to get his son Samuel back and also get revenge on those who crossed him, or is there more to it? Is there something more sinister? Was there potential plans for this even before his son potentially perished? We do not know for certain. As far as for now, we have to wait for Trek's next game to see the continuation of his plan, although we might have some more information in the final Vanguard Zombies DLC map. Of course, it's going to be all focused around the Construct and defeating Cortifex. We do have a quote from Vakana the Last saying the Construct, I always hated that thing, it sits outside the natural order, its motives unknowable to any of us. I cannot be certain, but it always seems like the Construct is trying to decide if life itself is worthy of existence. So we don't know what the Construct is or how it got into the Dark Ether. We know that Cortifex is very interested in it, and he doesn't even seem to know where it came from, and it seems to have been there since way before Cortifex was even a thing, and it seems like the Construct is actually charging up Cortifex, giving him his electric powers. But yeah, we don't know what the Construct is, but I'd imagine that Vanguard Zombies is setting up the idea of the Construct because it might be something that is touched upon within Trek's next game in COD 2024 Zombies. And maybe the Construct is going to be a plot point we'll see in that game too. Maybe Eddie Richtofen will be trying to harness its powers after Cortifex ends up not being able to do so. And as for now, we will have to wait for Trek's next game to see the continuation of his plan. I think it's important before we close out this video to summarize Eddie's personality. As a child, Eddie's personality is nothing substandard for a young boy, although he is a bit stubborn as noted by his unwillingness to share his toys with Samantha and his insistence that Samantha doesn't know enough about zombies in the games they play. Eddie's personality as an adult is one of cold calculation, being just as manipulative as Primis and Ultimis Richtofen, though unlike them, he seemingly possesses no desire for recognition and in fact goes out of his way to ensure people don't know who he is, indicating his ego may be somewhat more in check while still being highly manipulative and scheming. Eddie does not seem to have any attachment to his subordinates at Requiem, as seen with his willingness to arrest the entirety of Requiem senior staff once he no longer has any use for them. Additionally, he is shown to take extreme measures in order to achieve the means he needs, purposefully putting others' lives at risk if he views the situation as requiring it, such as when he threatened to have Elizabeth Grey killed if Samantha Maxis didn't kill a captured Omega Group soldier with her powers. Eddie does, however, seem to at least love his family, as he keeps a picture of them at his desk. Along with Samantha, Eddie is the one and only survivor of the previous multiverse. Unlike Sam, Eddie seems to have retained some memory of prior events, as seen with the knowledge of Samantha's birth, as well as having a snow globe of Dr. Monty's house on his desk. The section you just watched on Eddie was recorded during Vanguard's life cycle. Of course, I made many inferences and theories during that section, and some of which may be slightly outdated now. But now I want to move forward into Black Ops 6 Zombies now that we have a lot more indications as to what Richtofen is up to in this game. And once again, I want to preface that I of course will be making inferences and theories here, so by the time that Black Ops 6 Zombies swings around, some of these may be slightly off. At the end of the day, that is all we can do is theorize based on the limited amount of information we have now at this current point in time. Firstly, we know that the location in the Pacific that Dr. Peck is heading to 5 years after the Forsaken is called Terminus Island. Previously, we did not know of the name. The map is set in 1991 after a zombie outbreak occurs yet again. Previously, we thought it was going to be set in 1990, so we're just slightly out because of course the Forsaken was set in 1985, so a 5-year time jump we thought it would be in 1990. However, the Forsaken takes place on June 4th, 1985, so technically we're still within around about 5 years, anywhere before June 4th, 1991, which gives you a rough estimate of when the map will be set, but to be honest, the exact date is probably not that important to the story. Nevertheless, Jack Fletcher from Modern Warfare 3 Zombies seemingly enlisted here from 1991 until 1993, where he was discharged, working for the CIA. It's unclear as to why he was discharged. Did he do something wrong, or was this just the end of Eddie's operation on Terminus. It could be that the Requiem heads don't escape until 1993, and they are still held there for all those years. Fletcher even later names his group Terminus Outcomes after this island too, with the base seemingly being located in Brunei, potentially after it was disbanded. During the time that the Requiem heads were held in prison at Terminus Island, Eddie performed experiments on them, as it's both a laboratory and a prison facility, and he was likely experimenting on them due to their high exposure to Ethereum throughout Black Ops Cold War Zombies, altering their DNA permanently. On the map, Dr. Peck is assisted by a new character called Maya. She is helping to free our crew, but she has an ulterior motive as well. It's unclear as to how Peck and Maya meet at this point, but it seems that they end up being successful in freeing the Requiem heads, although we do not know where Strauss is. Maybe due to his age or sniffing Ethereum, he is too ill to be a playable character on the map and may communicate via radio or something else. I say this because we know he ends up surviving until at least 1996. Potentially a friend, family member, or even a sibling is too imprisoned here that she wants to break free. It's also unclear if Maya and Peck meet on the island itself or before, when he is getting the boat. I guess technically speaking we don't know if Peck is successful in rescuing the Requiem heads, so maybe that is why Jack Fletcher is still here until 1993, as they don't actually end up being freed, but considering we know they're a playable crew, you would think they would escape, otherwise how else are they going to continue into future DLC maps unless there's some sort of big time jump, considering the fact we know they end up surviving until 1996. So that is one map that we know of, Terminus Island, that Richtofen is controlling, but we have learned that the town in West Virginia that I discussed earlier that Eddie attempted to shut down at the end of Cold War Zombies is formerly called Liberty Falls. It seems that he was unsuccessful in evacuating all of the civilians from the town under his cover story of a power plant leak, which likely impeded parts of his plans, as they asserted their rights as American citizens. We know this due to Intel and Modern Warfare 3 Zombies, in which Miller recounted her experience growing up in this town as a child, when in 1991 a zombie outbreak suddenly began. They tried escaping the town, but seemingly her dad transformed into a zombie, and we are yet to learn the outcome of a mum who ran off screaming. What caused the zombie outbreak though? The outbreak zones closed after the Forsaken was contained. What reopened them? This is likely because of the giant Dark Ether gateway that Richtofen requires for Project Janus. It was proposed by the shareholders of Project Janus to use the gateway that Valentina had on Mauer de Toten, but he asserted that the time was not right and it would lead to the destruction of the world if he struck too soon. So instead, we'll see Project Janus carried out in Black Ops 6 Zombies. And it is likely that this giant gateway is going to be on Liberty Falls itself, explaining why he was digging tunnels and hiring scientists and trying to keep it a secret from the public, apparently wanting to build a giant wall around the town. Most likely in 1991, he activated the gateway, the town's citizens began transforming, and an outbreak ensues. We know that Terminus takes place simultaneously to Liberty Falls, so their Easter eggs may intercept, with Liberty being set during the day, Terminus at night. When the gateway is opened, it may not only start an outbreak here, but at other points around the globe too, including Terminus. Outbreaks may crop up in points where there are weak spots between the Dark Ether and the regular world. Considering Ravenov and Samantha Maxis diverted the large Dark Ether inversion warheads into the Pacific Ocean in the first outbreak quest, that could explain as to how the zombies end up there. This could be a point where the Veil is weakened massively. Richtofen even had a large Dark Ether cannon and other defenses created on Terminus, so he was seemingly preparing for this moment to guard the island. If the Requiem heads manage to escape from their prison cells though, how exactly does this happen? Is it because the zombie outbreak begins and then the guards end up getting killed? Does Peck do something to free them? It is very unclear, but I'm sure that Richtofen probably factored these in. At this point, it is unclear. The biggest new piece of information surrounding Richtofen from Modern Warfare 3 Zombies is that he seemingly forced the birth of Ava Jansen herself. Requiem apparently took DNA samples from both Ravenov and Samantha Maxis and the other Requiem heads, with or without their consent, and inseminated them inside of Dr. Grey, making her the surrogate mother. This is extremely twisted, but likely somehow ties into the plans for Project Janus, but it's very unclear as to why at this point in time. So this means that Samantha Maxis and Ravenov are Ava's biological parents, with Dr. Grey being the surrogate parent. It is also unclear as to when the DNA samples were taken. It could have been during the events of Cold War Zombies, or whilst they were imprisoned on Terminus. For Samantha though, it must have been during Cold War Zombies, likely when Richtofen interrogated her in Block 8, considering she is currently in the Dark Ether during Black Ops 6 Zombies, he likely had the DNA extracted prior. Ravenov does reference Requiem, and of course Requiem was shut down by Richtofen in 1985, so maybe all of their DNA was extracted prior to them being imprisoned. During Cold War Zombies, zombies, but Requiem could still be used as a blanket term for the group, I guess. Exactly when the DNA was extracted doesn't really matter though, apart from Samantha, since if it was during her time in the Dark Ether, they would have had to come into contact with her somehow, which would be an integral part of the storyline if that's the case, but like I said, it's probably prior. Ava Jansen was birthed by Dr. Gray in 1993, so she was likely impregnated in 1992, a year after the events on Terminus. It is unclear whether she consented to this, or at least was manipulated into it by Richtofen. It is also unclear whether later in the story the Requiem heads may begin working with Richtofen. Maybe they partially went along with his plan after being told it could help save Samantha, or for some other reason that may not be entirely truthful, or maybe even partially truthful. But like I said, we don't know if Gray consented to this. Ravenov references that they took their DNA with or without their consent, but it is possible that Gray consented. Ravenov says he never chose to be her father, so it seems that at least he didn't consent. And even if Gray did consent, like I said, she may have been manipulated into it. The day that Ava was born, a mysterious entity was simultaneously created in the Dark Ether, which we now know to be a mirrored version of Ava herself. Like I mentioned before, Janus is the god of gateways and is often depicted as having two heads. Janus and Jansen sound so similar too, so it seems likely that Ava is a key part of Janus, but what exactly? That we may find in the final story mission of Modern Warfare 3 Zombies. His plan may still be ongoing. The entity has communicated to Ava ever since she was a child, through whispers and dreams. It seems she is a living bond and a physical gateway to the Dark Ether itself, due to herself being split between the entity and her. She has powers like Samantha and may reform with the entity, but beyond that, what is the goal that Richtofen is up to? In 1996, the Requiem heads, Weaver, Carver, Gray and Strauss all sacrificed themselves to an Ethereum device in a hotel bunker underneath Urzikstan. Before doing so, Gray recorded a video message for Ava to watch later, explaining that she wishes she could remember her childhood and how sorry she was. She expresses great memories of Samantha and informs her of the true story behind her birth. That following on from this recording, Ava was then given up for adoption to the Jansens, ex-CIA officials, and Ravenov kept watch of her from afar before now fully watching over her in Modern Warfare 3 Zombies. While she was adopted by the Jansens, as she grew older and older, she eventually uncovered the truth about Gray being her mother, and she started diving into Ethereum research, before eventually landing herself slap bang in the middle of the zombie outbreak in Modern Warfare 3 Zombies. Why did the Requiem heads sacrifice themselves though? It seems that Gray or Strauss may have actually created the device, considering it can be seen in the recording before their death. Did Richtofen tell them to do this, or was it their own plan? Was this part of Project Janus? Was this to try and rescue Samantha Maxis? There are so many questions here that will be unveiled in Black Ops 6 Zombies. I do wonder if Samantha was trying to communicate to them throughout Black Ops 6 Zombies, saying, I need to be free, etc., similar to how Valentina was tricked by the Forsaken, similar to how the Shadow Man tricks the crew on Shadows of Evil, and tricked Maxis on Revelations, or how the entity's been speaking to Ava. It's a very recurring beat in the zombie storyline. Maybe Samantha was manipulating them the entire time in a similar way. But right now, like I said, it's very unclear. We have no idea as to how consensual this whole event was. It does seem like they at least partially chose to do it though. It just is unclear whether Richtofen was also in the mix, or whether this was entirely separate from whatever he is up to. Richtofen is a master manipulator, and I could definitely see him convincing them to do this, even if it isn't by their own accord. Now, Ravenov says to Ava that they tried to rescue Samantha in Black Ops 6 Zombies, but ultimately failed, and we do not know whether that's a separate event earlier to this, or one and the same. Did Samantha cause them to die like was foreshadowed by the Forsaken? Maybe she tried manipulating them and saying this is to free her, but it actually resulted in their deaths. She may no longer be in control of her actions in the Dark Ether, and may have fully been taken by the Dark Ether. Samantha's status remains listed in Project Janus's records as classified 6776 days ago, as of 2021 in Modern Warfare 3 Zombies. Why is Richtofen tracking Samantha for Janus though? Considering she's being tracked, it does seem to imply Eddie is still around in the background of Modern Warfare 3. Does he still need her, or does she pose a threat to Janus, whatever they are up to? She's been in the Dark Ether for centuries now, and her powers have likely increased by a millennia, along with her corruption and psyche. There are 2 Ethereum vials missing from the device where the characters sacrifice themselves. It is possible that Ravenov took one to allow him to have extended life, aging slower in Modern Warfare 3 Zombies, which is in contrast to what Ethereum exposure actually does. Since in the message Gray left to Ava, she says the Ethereum was killing them before this recording, so most likely they would have died naturally anyways by the Ethereum exposure if they didn't sacrifice themselves to this device. So maybe this was a last-ditch effort before their death to sacrifice themselves. Maybe their essence was given up to charge the device, and maybe it allows these characters to be taken by people to live longer. Of course, we know that time passes slower in the Dark Ether than the regular world, so I guess technology along those lines could be possible. Maybe the crew sacrificed themselves because they wanted to give extended life to Ravenov to allow him to continue to watch over Ava all the way into Modern Warfare 3 Zombies. But like I said, who took the other canister? I think this is likely Richtofen, and he's actually been controlling things behind the Modern Warfare 3 Zombies, just like in Cold War Zombies, acting as the director. He likely was the one who put together Operation Deadbolt, immediately learning of Zakhaev causing an outbreak. Maybe he even played a role in this outbreak beginning to begin with, considering there's a connection with Jack Fletcher being on Terminus. He likely handpicked Ravenov to join Deadbolt, despite Laswell, Green, etc. pushing against the idea and being cautious of his unknown background and being very suspicious. We think this because the Laswell was communicating with a high-up official in government who said, "You know who I am," an inversion of Richtofen's famous quote.
Do you know who I am?
Don't you know who I am?
He also says, "I trust my status and position have been appropriately communicated to you." It seems the White House and even the president themselves approved Deadbolt, which has led to speculation that Richtofen may even now be the president of the United States themselves, or if he was successful in rescuing his son Samuel in Black Ops 6 Zombies, maybe he could be the president instead. This is something I've tackled more in depth in prior videos that I'll have linked in this video's description. Regardless of whether or not Eddie or his son is the president themselves, I still think it's very likely that he, his son, or both have been controlling Modern Warfare 3 Zombies behind the scenes, and if he or his son are not the president, then at the very least, the president is listening to Richtofen and or his son's demands, and he has lots of high-up officials right up to the highest levels in government, the White House itself and the Directorate Office, at his disposal. And I think this will likely culminate in a cliffhanger in the final story mission of Modern Warfare 3 Zombies. If Ava rejoins with the Entity, that could be a big part of the plan. If Ava rejoins with the Entity, that could be a big part of Project Janus or some other plan. It's rumored that Call of Duty 2025 will be another Black Ops game set in 2030, a Black Ops 2 sequel, and will feature round-based zombies again and maybe an open world mode too, like Outbreak. This game could follow on in the zombies mode directly on from wherever we are left in a cliffhanger conclusion of Modern Warfare 3 Zombies. Richtofen or his son could be revealed right at the end, similar to the end of Cold War Zombies. Let me know your thoughts on this theory in the comments below. So there's a lot to digest here. Richtofen was seemingly involved in many events throughout Black Ops 6 Zombies that I've mentioned, and he may be controlling things in Modern Warfare 3 Zombies. It also has been foreshadowed many times that Ravenov is going to die, so maybe that's going to happen at the end of the story mission. Maybe the Entity and Ava reconnect and they kill Ravenov, especially because the Entity could take advantage of her anger towards Ravenov, considering he lied to her surrounding her birth for all of these years. If Ravenov is killed, then there needs to be some other character that's still left in the story to move that forward, and like I said, I really think Richtofen or his son could be somewhat involved in all of this. But with that being said, that's the entire timeline of Richtofen, his Ultimis self, his Primis self, and finally his director Eddie self. However, like I said, many of this section on Eddie has been speculation because there's so much that we don't know. So throughout Black Ops 6 Zombies we'll learn so much more, and by the end of that game we'll understand him a lot more, and probably by that point we'll know what Janus actually is. Of course, by the time that Black Ops 6 Zombies' story is finished, I will do an updated video to this video recounting his full timeline with more concrete information, and if he's still around in the story, speculate about what's next in COD 2025. But with that said, this has been an extremely long video. Let me know all of your thoughts below. Let me know if you agree with any of my theories or if you have any theories of your own towards what Eddie is up to with Project Janus. What is his goal? Anyways, thank you for watching the video. Make sure to subscribe if you're not here for the latest and greatest Call of Duty news and information. So anyways, thank you for watching, and bye.